Welcome students to week 5. So this week, the video that I made last year, I decided to keep because I think in general it's an excellent video and I want you to see it. However, I do feel like there have been some important changes since the endemic. Instead of saying post-pandemic, which is not fully accurate, I've started saying endemic, which is where we are. We are in the endemic, whatever that looks like. But I also, in the process, wanted to clarify a few of the points that I made in the last video. So let's do that. In the other video, I start out by talking about Steger's definition of culture, which is symbolic construction, articulation, and dissemination of meaning. That's a mouthful. I think it's important to break it down a little. So culture has a number of components. So beliefs and ideas are part of culture, values, images, and stories. And when I think about the sharing of images and stories in 2022, I think of Instagram and TikTok. And of course, there is also a commercial aspect to culture. Culture is also revealed by what we buy. There are 3 key questions raised in the conversation about cultural globalization. And these you will see as consistent questions through the different materials that you're going to read or view. So the first question is whether cultural globalization creates a level of unity, which can be positive, right? Or whether it tries to create, or whether it actually tries to create and actually creates a level of uniformity. So cultural globalization has often been talked about as the McDonaldization of the world, which is about cultural uniformity, not cultural unity. But we could look at the movement for the preservation of the environment internationally as utilizing cultural globalization to create a level of unity. So it's not uniformity, it's unity. So that's one of the questions we're going to be looking at. To what extent does cultural globalization create unity, and to what extent does it create uniformity? Of course, there is a whole conversation that I go into in some degree of depth in the other video about what's called glocalization, which is the hybridization of culture. So the hybridization of culture is all about not losing your original culture, but instead combining your original culture with globalized culture, so that, and actually that's even a misnomer, it's that globalized culture contains within it a number of original cultures that may not be lost, but instead may be combined in new and maybe even exciting ways. So that brings us to the second question, which is the question of mutuality. To what extent is cultural globalization now not only from the West to the rest, but something that's actually fully mutual? Are we watching Korean boy bands? and are they copies of American boy bands, or are they something different entirely? So these are the kinds of questions we have to ask. And of course, the third question is to what extent we have, and it's connected to the last one, but it's to what extent we have agency in the process of cultural globalization, given the manipulative power of those who own and control the internet. So I go into more depth in that. In the other video, I talk about the Guardians of the Galaxy. But those are just, I think it helps to be clear about frameworks. And those are 3 frameworks. They're 3 threads that run through the different materials: unity or uniformity or glocalization, mutuality, and the question of how much agency we have given the level of manipulation. So hopefully that's helpful. So there are a number of important voices on cultural globalization, And I would really like you to, at a minimum, know who they are because of the limitations on how much I can assign. I have assigned some of them in either written form or in the form of videos. I have made some of their videos optional and some of them I have left off, but I want at a minimum for you to know who they are and what their key messages are. So Thomas Friedman is the great apologist for globalization, and that includes cultural globalization. His phrase is "the world is flat," and he believes that internet-based globalization is an opportunity for individual entrepreneurs all over the world to become their best. At the same time, he is concerned about how the internet fuels terrorism. You can get a hold of his videos and you can buy his books. His books are not primarily available in digital form. Shoshana Zuboff, her key phrase is surveillance capitalism, and she focuses on the power of the corporations that provide internet access and context for communication. I am assigning her. I think she's really important. Nicholas Carr focuses, his key phrase is what the internet is doing to our brains. He focuses on the biological impact of the internet, and I am assigning a video of him. Sherry Turkle is very famous. She wrote, her key phrase is "alone together," and she focuses on how our connections with others can be affected by our relationship with the internet. Robert Putnam, who was the sociologist who wrote the famous book Bowling Alone, covers some of the same territory as Sherry Turkle, but I think he covers it in more interesting ways. So I do have an optional video for you to watch. Unfortunately, his best work on cultural globalization through the internet is in the newest version of Bowling Alone, which we do not have in our library. So you would need to purchase it. But what he essentially focuses on is the breakdown of social connections historically, the role of globalization and the internet in that breakdown, and then how that breakdown can be reversed. So in Bowling Alone, in the new chapter, he writes about the creation of online and offline alloys, like a metal that combines two metals in order to rebuild social connection. And in the video that I have uploaded, that is optional because it's long, he talks about historical patterns of how social connections have been rebuilt that consistently involve innovative young people with a moral vision. And so those are the people who would be creating the alloys that then rebuild social connections. Last but not least, Ruha Benjamin focuses on the new Jim Code, and she looks primarily about how the internet perpetuates human prejudice and racism, not intentionally, but because the programmers are themselves biased. So I am assigning Ruha Benjamin. I think it's really important. So I want to talk about the consequences of the pandemic and how these consequences have added to what I said in the last video. Because the last video we were in the middle of it. Now we're beginning to see what some of the consequences were and are. So during the pandemic, the internet became a lifeline. That Amazon, of course, rocketed because people were stuck at home and needed to receive deliveries. And of course, essential workers made those deliveries, and many of them died as a result. So, but the internet did become a lifeline. Now, I think that when something becomes a lifeline like that, in the midst of a highly traumatic context, that there is a form of trauma bonding that goes on. Trauma bonding is what happens when you're in trauma with someone, that you tend to bond to them very deeply. So I think most of us bonded to the internet. It became our companion. And that makes us more vulnerable than ever to manipulation through the internet because it's become a member of the family, which means that we now operate in a hybrid universe. And we need to learn how to operate in a hybrid universe. People now know that they can stay home instead of coming out. And we have to understand what that means, from our work lives to our church lives to our political lives to all other aspects. At the same time, people are lonelier than they've ever been and hungry for community. And they are weary of divisions, because you will learn when you look at the other video exactly how the Guardians of the Galaxy have exacerbated social divisions and how that has been part of cultural globalization. It has connected us and divided us at the same time. There's a wonderful study called the Hidden Tribe Study that is international, that looks both at the nature of the divisions between us, but also at the real desire on the part of many people to not be as divided as we are. So I hope that's helpful, and I look forward, as always, to your reflections. Thank you.